Welcome to episode 55 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. Today's special anniversary episode is celebrating the first year of the podcast. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast, Season 2. I can't believe it's been a full year of the podcast already. Year 1 brought us 54 episodes since we started with 3 when it launched on July 6th, 2018, and we now have nearly 60,000 downloads in 133 countries around the world. Year 1 included connections to amazing listeners in person and on social media, conversations with academics and students, business owners and marketers, the launch of my column on Inc.com, and so much more. In today's episode, I'm going to share the top 10 episodes by downloads, some of your favorites, with clips from the audiograms you submitted, and a few of my favorite episodes, including which ones I share the most. I will also give some looks behind the scenes with the top questions I get asked, the funniest thing people say to me now that I had never heard before becoming a podcaster, my favorite books, because I get asked for those recommendations all the time, and more. Instead of a shout out today, I just want to take a moment to thank you all for listening, subscribing, sharing, connecting on social media, reaching out to let me know your wins and the behavioral economics concepts you've applied in your own businesses and life. Those are some of my favorite messages to get. I truly love hearing from you, so please continue to reach out. Whether it's a meme that you want to send out or a GIF via social media, or if you want to tell me a story about something that you did via email, I love to hear about it all, so definitely come find me. In this past year, I have had listeners reach out either by email or on social media from all over the US and Canada, but also beyond to countries like Spain, Portugal, South Africa, India, and Israel. After year 1, the top 10 countries for downloads are, of course, the US, followed by the UK, Canada, Australia, and Germany to round out the top 5. Then we have India, Brazil, Mexico, Spain, and South Africa at number 10. That means all the continents are represented in the top 10. How cool is that? Well, I mean, I guess except for Antarctica, but I don't really think they get stats from there. So we'll go ahead and stick with saying all the continents are represented. And because the bulk of the downloads are here in the US, let's count down the top 10 downloads by state. Coming in at number 10 is North Carolina, followed by Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and Georgia at number 6. The state with the 5th most downloads is Illinois. Number 4 is New York. Then Texas at number 3, which isn't too surprising since I know the Texas A&M Human Behavior Lab are big subscribers of the podcast, and I have a few clients there as well. Number 2 on the list is my home state of Washington, and the state with the most downloads with nearly 15% of all of those in the entire U.S. is California. Thanks to every single one of you. Where are you listening from? Share with me on social media where you can find me as The Brainy Biz. I would love to hear from you, connect, and learn more about how you found out about the podcast and what you've been learning. It's just all sorts of fun for me. So I look forward to connecting with you. All the top episodes and links to my social channels, including the Inc. column, are available for you in the show notes, which can be found within the app you're listening to or by visiting thebrainybusiness.com/55. I also want to take a moment to say If you have not yet signed up to be on the weekly email list, please consider doing so now. This gives you access to all the freebies on the special subscribers page, and you're the first to know when new stuff is out, be it articles, episodes, new freebies, courses, and when I'm traveling near you. Those of you in the States can sign up by texting the word Brainy, Brainy, to 345-345. You'll be added to the list and get a free copy of my ebook as a thank you. All right, let's kick this episode off with a couple of audio clips from listeners like you.
This is Nikki Roush, your sales maven. Congratulations on 1 year in podcasting. This is my favorite podcast. It is brilliant. It is packed full of useful information, and I wish you continued success in the coming year. Take care.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hernan, host of the Business Bros podcast. I've been listening to Melina's podcast since she was down and around episode 6 or 7. She's been instrumental in the way that we think of our marketing, our presentation, the things we put out into the public, because of all the little brain-friendly advice that she's been giving on her podcast. If there's one podcast that we've recommended most on our own show, it's Melina's Brainy Business podcast. Thanks again, Melina, for being awesome and putting out the content you put out. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Nikki and Hernan. I actually have a funny story about Hernan and his brother James of the Business Bros podcast. They truly were some of the first listeners of the show that I met via social media. Nikki, I think, was probably maybe the first. I've known her for a long time, and I know that she's been a supporter from the beginning and before it got started. She actually introduced me to Natalie Ekdahl from Biz Chicks podcast, who made the initial recommendation that I start a podcast. So you can all thank Nikki and Natalie for me being here and working in on season 2. So I met the Business Bros when they reached out to me on Twitter really, really early on. We had chatted back and forth and they did a discovery call. And last year, when I was attending a conference in San Diego, we met for lunch since we'd been chatting back and forth for such a long time. You might have seen the pictures on social media from that. On that day, they were the first people to say something to me that I actually hear all the time now. And I think it's really funny. It's definitely not something that I ever would have thought I would have people say to me. We met at the restaurant and said hello, and James was there first. And he said, "It's weird to watch your mouth move while you talk." And when Hernan got there a few minutes later, he said the same thing. It was pretty funny and helped me to realize just how much people are getting used to hearing me speak via audio only, and how you're probably hearing me on earbuds and whatever that happens to be, or on your speaker, but not having actual video. And so you don't form that mental picture in the same way. Like I said, I just think this is so funny. And I've had people now say that to me all the time, even via Zoom calls. So when we first interact on video, that they're surprised and find it to be so funny. So anyway, thanks to Hernan and James and Nikki and all the long-term listeners. I appreciate you all. As promised, I want to share the top 10 episodes of the podcast from the first year. And we're going to count down again. This is the top 10 based on your downloads. And I will give you some of my thoughts about each one as we count down the top 10, my either favorite things or thoughts from them. And we do have a couple of audio clips where some of you had reached out and said these were your favorite episodes as well. The first, starting with number 10 on the most downloaded episodes of the podcast, is episode 43, A Guide for You to Create a Brainy Brand. And let's hear a message from listener Maureen.
Hi, my name's Maureen, and I'm addicted to the Brainy Business podcast. It's so hard to pick just one episode that stands out. There's so many that are so powerful. I loved the series on the senses. I loved the series on the nudges. But I think it was when I came to one of the episodes, 43, 44, somewhere around there on branding, that I knew that I had to go home and call or set up a discovery call with Melina. The one on branding, said it has to be fun and intelligent and consistent messaging. And that when you have a brand that fits your company, one that resonates with your customers, something just clicks. And I knew I had to connect with her. I'm in the process of creating a new business, and I was struggling with the name. I just couldn't get it right and just wasn't sitting well. So after our discovery call, I booked a VIP day with her, and we just spent the day hammering things out. I now have the perfect name, the one that just resonates so well with me and what I am doing. And we worked on parameters around my branding. So I'm in the process of getting that all completed, all because I had taken the time to do a discovery call with Melina. So run, don't walk, get that discovery call done. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I loved working with you, as you know, on your branding project and for your new company, which I'm so excited to see all the amazing things that you're going to be doing in your space. It was really fun for me to do that episode on the Brainy branding, and that had come up. I was having just a ton of people asking that people around me that were going through rebrand projects or launching a brand or not sure when they should be taking on tasks for rebranding or whatnot. And because of my background in marketing and branding, it was really something where I have the experience of having been through this multiple times, either with clients or in my corporate life. And it was just really fun to bring all my thoughts sort of together on what it means to be a Brainy brand, looking at how behavioral economics ties into things that I had done before I knew what the terms might be, what that looked like, and putting that baseline before the rebrand, refresh, reinforce episode, and doing those two sort of in a series was one that I really enjoyed, because if you don't know me, marketing and branding are my favorite. I love looking at other companies and what they're doing and thinking about why they're doing that and how it all comes together and how well it's speaking to the brain or not, which you've heard me talk about some of that on the podcast, but really getting those thoughts out there from years and years of experience was a lot of fun. So thank you, Maureen, for your vote for episode 43, and for all of you who have downloaded it and made it the 10th most downloaded episode of the podcast. Next, episode 42 comes in at number 9, which was the one obviously right before that, which was the behavioral economics analysis of Apple Card. This was a really, really fun one for me to do, and it was so timely. It was one that I actually did not have. I had a whole plan of how the episodes were going to go, and I went through and shifted everything to be able to bring this in when Apple made its announcement of Apple Card, because my background in financial services, and I have so many credit union and bank clients and those in the industry. I know this is something that had been talked about for a long time, and that there would be a lot of questions about this and best ways to react and what they were doing well. And I'm glad that I had this medium to be able to get something out there quickly to everyone and talk about Apple Card. I'm very intrigued to see, if you remember, I talked about anticipation in that episode and how making the announcement early means that they have time to sort of build excitement. And so to see where there were some naysayers at the beginning and how many people, now that we've had this familiarity building, that they are going to jump for Apple Card when it comes available here in the coming months. So that's going to be interesting to watch. And there are some really good tips for all sorts of businesses, not just financial institutions, in that episode, which a lot of you have already heard since it made the top 10. Next is one of my favorite episodes, and with a study I love to share all the time. This is episode 32, The Overwhelmed Brain and Its Impact on Decision Making. And have a quick clip here from a listener who voted for this one as well.
Hello, Melina and Brain. I'm very passionate about the work I do, which is writing family stories for families wishing to preserve their legacies. Because of the uniqueness of my work, people often ask me for some information. In my excitement, it is so easy to overwhelm them with details. The podcast episode about the overwhelmed brain helped me to script clear and concise responses to the most common questions. Keeping my spiels short and sweet has led to more follow-up inquiries. And that leads to a more natural way to building long-lasting and trusting client relationships. It's a win-win for both of us. Thank you, Brainy Business.
Thanks so much, Debbie. And thank you for your vote and for your shout out to Brain. Gotta love that he can get a little tidbit in there. And I will be telling you a couple of the behind the scenes facts about Brain later on in the episode. So stick around for that. The overwhelmed brain, as I said, it includes one of my favorite studies, the chocolate cake study, which I share all the time with people. And I know they're always really fascinated hearing that one. And I recently got to reference that in one of my Inc.com articles, which was a lot of fun. And this one stood out for me because it was the first time I referenced Texas A&M University, and it was on my trip down there. One of my favorite episodes is actually 33, which didn't make the top 10, but that was my visit to the Human Behavior Lab and my interview with Dr. Palma. And the episode on the overwhelmed brain, I wrote the script for while I was flying down and on the plane for that trip. And so those two have just some really great memories for me. It was so exciting to be able to go down and see them. And they were really one of the first big connections that came out of the podcast. And I remember getting the email from Jeff Poole from A&M saying, who he was and how they were all listening and postdocs were listening and that they loved the podcast and spreading the word about behavioral economics. Interestingly, on that same trip to San Diego was when I got that email from Jeff. It's kind of funny how that all comes together. And I was able to, set up an initial call with Dr. Palma and learn more about what they were doing. And now we're working on some research projects together, building some out for different studies in different areas, which I'm really excited to be able to share about as they get moving. But it's been just amazing. And at that point was also really a shift for me in a mindset space. So when I started the podcast, I was originally thinking about small business owners and marketers and how they would be able to use this information in their businesses. And academics and people that actually had doctorates in economics and were studying behavior and how this all worked together, it didn't really occur to me that they would be finding value in the podcast. And that was really the tip of the iceberg there with A&M and helping me to realize the way that this could expand. And I am so thankful for the initial review that Jeff wrote and doing the shout out on the episode for that, which he then followed up and we started all that conversation. So thank you to those at A&M and for not being too overwhelmed to reach out and for continuing to listen. And the study that you had done there, which got featured in episode 32, which was number 8 on the top 10 downloaded episodes of all time so far here on the podcast. Moving on to episode number 3, which was higher on the list at the end of the year. It is now number 7 on the most downloaded episodes. That is, do lead magnets work and do you need one? I really loved doing this episode. It was one of the first 3 that came out when the podcast went live on July 6th in 2018. This was inspired by a video I had done before launching the podcast, and it had such a great response from people on social media, people liking it, asking more questions, talking about it, sharing it. And so I knew it warranted a full episode on the podcast because the video I did was maybe, 2 minutes long. So being able to expand on the concepts that go into lead magnets from, reciprocity and making sure that you don't overwhelm the brain and all these different aspects of lead magnets, how to think about them, and some tips for building them for different types of businesses was a really fun one, and one that was created based on votes from pre-listeners before the podcast launched. So thank you for that. And I'm glad that it has continued to resonate through the first year. It'll be interesting to see if it hangs on and stays in the top 10 as we do the next recap of the top downloads at some point later on in this next year. Coming in at number 6 is episode 47, which was the behavioral economics analysis of Costco. So Apple Card was number 9. And then here at number 6 is the episode on Costco, which actually came out 5 weeks later. So it's had a lot less time to get its downloads. But I know it was one that everybody was really excited about. When I searched after the Apple Card episode, I knew I wanted to do some more analyses. And so I had reached out on social media to ask people to vote for what companies they wanted an analysis of next. And Costco overwhelmingly got the top votes. There will be more of these coming in the future. A lot of really great recommendations came in for different episodes to be able to do. Harley Davidson was one I hadn't really thought about that is going to be fun. I think Coca-Cola, Disney, lots of businesses that you're interested in and wanting to know what it is that makes them different and how behavioral economics has helped them to succeed, even if they don't see it yet themselves. So they didn't have to implement intentionally some of these things because, of course, a lot of these companies have been around for a long time before this field was gaining popularity and the concepts got names and things like that. So being able to look at them now and see what they did and what you can learn for that in your business is something that is really fun for me and I know has been really valuable for listeners. So if you shop at Costco or if you're familiar with them and have heard really great things and curious about the membership model, I know I've had requests to do an episode specifically about memberships as well. So if you'd want to vote for that to come up next, definitely let me know on social media. But the Costco episode was one that I know people were really excited to have come out. And it looks like you've really been enjoying it because it has had so many downloads. So thanks for that. And definitely check it out if you haven't listened already. It's a fun one. Next is episode 35, which was the introduction to choice architecture and nudging. And there were some listeners who had voted for this series as one of their favorites. I was really excited to be able to do this one. And I know that through that series, talking about the air conditioning example was something that a lot of listeners had said that they really enjoyed, of being able to see all the ways that you can dig in on something that seems so simple. So week after week, talking about the air conditioning company and how they could be applying incentives and how they should be looking at defaults and how they should be expecting error and what that means and questions that I would ask, and just showing how deep this can go and how complex it can be, but the importance of that strategy of thinking through all these things on the front end so that everything's able to flow a lot better as you keep moving. As I said, when we got into that episode, it's a really complex concept and the topic, it's, Nobel Prize worthy work, and there are books written about nudges specifically, and choice architecture is really, really intricate and complex, which is why it got so many episodes. I had a whole class dedicated to it in my master's program. And there are so many aspects within choice architecture. So, different concepts that are applying into it at any time. So I really enjoyed talking about that. And it's so critical for any business to be able to understand the complexity of choice and how to structure your products and services and programs and whatever it is that you're putting out there in the world, being able to understand that if you offer these two products, somebody might choose option A. And then if you were to add in option C, more people are going to choose B instead of A now. And how making small tweaks to the offering, changing the choices that are available, can make it so that people are nudged in a different direction. So I really love that entire concept, and it's a huge basis for the entire field. So I'm glad that so many of you liked and downloaded and listened to that first episode intro in particular. And then I'm guessing that kind of jumped around to pick which of those you were interested in because there were so many. That is fairly common. It's been interesting. Another thing that I've found out throughout the year of having the podcast is learning that there seem to be really two ways that people listen. So there are some people who've reached out to me and let me know that they are the start to finish listeners. So they want to start at 1 and go to 2 and 3 and won't really skip maybe 1 or 2 that just aren't relevant to their business or whatnot, but truly want to just listen, from front to back all the way through. And then there's this whole other group that love to skip around. And so you might, start with episode 1 or 5 or whatever, and then, something that was recommended to you. And then you'll jump to 35 and then to 28 and then go up to 46 or whatever it happens to be, and just really enjoy jumping around. So I'm glad that so many of you made the choice to listen to that episode on choice architecture and nudging. And actually, the introduction to our most recent series, episode 45, the overview of personal biases, was the next one. That's the 4th most downloaded episode, which, if you think about it, is really amazing because it's so recent. So it's had a lot less time to garner downloads. And I want to send a thank you to Sophie from Switzerland, who had commented on Facebook to let me know that this series was her favorite group in the podcast, to which she said she especially liked the one about the way we approach the present and future differently, which those of you who have listened to the series know that that's one of my favorites as well, because it introduces my all-time favorite concept of time discounting, which did not make the top 10, but it is my favorite concept. And I've built a research study around it already. And this All Start Monday effect is it just sits with me in a way that I love to think about how it impacts things and help people to understand how they can make a slight shift to incorporate time discounting. So I'm glad that you enjoyed that series on the biases, Sophie, and everyone else who downloaded those. I was actually a bit nervous launching into that series because it's so different from anything else that I had done yet on the podcast. And so I wasn't sure how you all would respond to it, going kind of rapid fire through concepts versus really digging in on them. So it was nice to see that made it to the 4th most downloaded episode of all time so far, that overview of personal biases, and that actually a lot of those biases episodes are in the top, 20 downloads from there. So they've definitely all had a lot of traction. So I'm glad that those were valuable to you. And now we make our way into the top 3. And if you remember back to the top 10 that I did at the end of the year, these will not be a huge surprise. And if you've ever heard me recommend episodes, you know that this one at number 3, episode 5, The Truth About Pricing, is one that I recommend all the time. And here is a quick clip from a listener letting us know about why this is one of her favorites and her story about the truth about pricing.
Hello, this is Kadra from Edmonton, Alberta, and I'm the owner of Paper Scissors Paints Art Studio. The first episode I've ever listened to from the Brainy Business was The Truth About Pricing, and I was hooked ever since. Honestly, the information I received was incredible. I mean, I didn't even know this stuff existed. Behavioral economics is going to change how we see things and how businesses operate, I think. Thank you, Melina, for starting this. It's been incredible working with you, all your help. I honestly see the difference now when I purchase things, when I'm making my own decisions regarding my business.
Thank you so much, Kadra. Actually, Kadra was my first client from Canada, which was really fun. And if you are in Edmonton, you should definitely go check out her new space for Paper Scissors Paint, which is opening here this summer. By the time this comes out, it might be close to opening. So it was so fun to work with you on the pricing and see your brand evolve and working through social media and all the ways to be promoting the launch of the new space. I just truly loved working with you. And I'm so glad that you were intrigued enough by the truth about pricing to reach out and start working together. I've also done some workshops on the truth about pricing that I know people have really enjoyed. I actually have people, another sort of funny story comes from this episode, that when I go and speak at events around the country, it's not uncommon that people will have listened to the podcast before the event takes place. Often the organizers will send out links and things like that. And I started having people really early on that we would run into each other, or they would be walking by while I'm at the conference. I've never met them before. And they would sort of do this like point shout out across the room and say, "Oh, hey, it's not about the cookie, right, Melina? Ha ha ha." Which to anybody else would seem like a really strange thing to say to a stranger, but I totally get it. It's a thing that is unique to me and what I have to say about pricing and how that all works. And so getting that shout out is a really quick and easy way for somebody to let me know they listen to the podcast, they get it, and that we're, on the same page. I also have a lot of questions that come up from people about the best way to come up with your own scent of the cookies and how that concept of priming can be applying into any other type of business where you don't have something delicious like cookies to sell. And so that is one of the courses that's going to be coming up soon of working on your scent of the cookies. So keep an eye out for that. Next at the top 2, the second most downloaded episode of all time is episode 2, which is the top 5 wording mistakes businesses make. This was another one that launched 1 year ago tomorrow, by the time this comes out, on the very first day, and was based on suggestions from pre-listeners, just like that lead magnets episode. And originally the request was for a top 10 wording mistakes, but settled on the 5 to help make it something that was easier to grasp and not be overwhelming. And this also has brought up a really funny thing that I wouldn't have thought that I would be associated with. But cotton candy grapes are a thing that people will bring up to me all the time. I will get shout outs on Twitter that have to do with cotton candy grapes all the time. Somebody said that they were doing something and it was I love the smell of marketing in the morning or something. And I said, well, what does marketing smell like? And she said, cotton candy grapes, haha. So this is what has become affiliated with me, is kind of a funny thing that I never would have thought and just happened to find when I was researching for that episode, and that we had bought some and actually have some in the house. I had some cotton candy grapes today in honor of this episode and recording. So those top 5 wording mistakes have also become a popular speaking topic, and people tend to really understand and be able to grasp the concepts and make shifts in their business, which I really love. And the stories that have come out of that have been a lot of fun. So episode 2 is the second most downloaded of all time, which is followed by episode 1, Unlocking the Secrets of the Brain, which I find to be fitting and not surprising in a lot of ways, in that a lot of people, regardless of where they start, like I said, some people like to jump around, some people like to go straight through. But I think most people, especially at this point, really maybe listen to 1 or 2 and then feel the need to check out from the beginning and see what they want to listen to. So I'm not surprised that there are so many downloads of that first episode. I really enjoyed making that one. It was actually, so another sort of funny story. Those first 2 episodes, I had to fully record and then re-record a second time, which is a lot of talking. And where I was releasing the first 3 episodes at the same time, I was recording quite a bit, but had a weird, snafu with a microphone, and this didn't come out the right way. But I had originally wanted and was hoping that I could do the episode via bullet points and notes, which whenever I do, public speaking or things like that, I can't go off of a script. It's just not my style. So I figured the podcast would be the same, but it was not. And what I found listening back to that first episode, possibly the first 2, was that I think I said the word fascinating about 850 times over those first episodes. And I don't think that that's a word that I actually say in my life that much, but apparently I think every study in the world is fascinating. And that's the only word that was coming to mind. I said it over and over again, which helped me to realize that I need to come up with better adjectives and verbs and all sorts of words and referencing things. And so full on scripts are the better way to go. So I do work off of a script. That's a question I get all the time. So I write out a full verbatim script every single week. And even when I think of things while I'm writing and think, oh, I almost forgot that, I will write that into the script and try to get back into that moment when I'm recording to you so that it doesn't feel boring and scripted, but that we still get all the goodness that you were hoping to grasp. So those are the top 10 episodes based on your downloads. And clearly some of your favorites were represented in the top 10. But there was one that had multiple votes and was an obvious listener favorite, even though it isn't in the top downloaded. So if you have not listened to this one yet, you're going to want to put it to the top of your listening list. That episode is... well, I'll let you tell us.
Episode 11, Anchoring and Adjustment.
Anchoring and Adjustment.
Anchoring and Adjustment.
This episode was obviously an overwhelming favorite of yours, and it's one of mine as well. One of my very favorite stories and studies, the Snickers and the 38% increase in sales, is in this episode. This study is one I use in most of the presentations I give, and it's so easy for companies to implement and see immediate improvements, which I love. And it really lends itself to research and A/B testing and things like that, just to see those small tweaks that can make a really big difference, like that 38% increase in sales, and to be able to know that it had a really big improvement. So here are a couple of votes for some other episodes, which are also some of my favorites, but I'll let our friend Nikki tell you about those and why she likes these 2 here next.
I also love episode 23, Reciprocity. It actually made me laugh out loud. And Melina is so charming in this episode. It's one of my favorites. And of course, episode 31 on mirror neurons, because I love mirror neurons, have studied it in my own studies with neurolinguistic programming, and it's so very powerful. And Melina does such a great job of explaining it that it makes it so easy to think about this as you implement the techniques that she teaches.
Thanks so much, Nikki. I too really, really enjoyed that reciprocity episode. It was one that I liked to be able to launch and put out on Thanksgiving. And also I got to talk about Sheldon Cooper and the Big Bang Theory, which is always one of my favorites. That is one where, so like I said, I work on a script, but I was very genuinely, I've seen all the episodes of The Big Bang Theory at least probably half a dozen times each. I just love that show. It's one I like to have on in the background. And I could watch them all and I still think that they're funny. So my husband will laugh at me because I still think they're funny, even when I know exactly what they're going to say. And that was an episode he had listened to, and he said after the fact that he really appreciated that he could tell and he knew I was genuinely laughing reading the script that I had written that was based on an episode I had seen half a dozen times, and that I still thought it was funny and was chuckling to myself genuinely because I am ridiculous, apparently. So that's the story behind that. And then mirror neurons, I agree, Nikki, are just so amazing and fascinating. And realizing that the reaction you have when you see somebody get a paper cut, or if you're watching a scary movie, my husband actually has just started making me watch Dexter, which I never watched because it's the paper cut over and over again. So I get a little bit, I like the show, but I don't like to watch the gory bits. I also don't watch The Walking Dead or anything like that, or Game of Thrones. Sorry for those of you that are fans, but I just don't like to see that sort of thing. And I've gotten off topic, but with the mirror neurons, I definitely am cowering, and he is laughing at me because he says they're not showing anything, but I know what's coming. I know what's going to happen. My mirror neurons go crazy when I watch scary shows, and I get scared. So I don't like to watch those. So thanks for your vote, Nikki. I prefer the mirror neurons for eating the ice cream cone like the monkey had versus scary stuff. Our next vote from a listener is from Kelly Ferguson of Ferguson Avenue Photography, who said via Facebook that episode 8, What is Value, is her favorite. And she said her big takeaway was that value is not a number. It's subjective and based on our perception and how much we love whatever we're talking about, whatever's out there. And I really liked this one too. It was so much fun to come up with examples of the, paintings and art and how that creates value versus the $200 grilled cheese sandwich, and the difference between price and cost and value. This definitely gets into the questions I get asked the most. So pricing is something people ask about all the time, both in establishing value, kind of what it is, how that works, price versus cost. Also, the pricing should end in a 975 or a 0, which was focused on in episode 17. And anything to do with pricing are probably the questions that I get the most, even more than what is behavioral economics. So that's something people ask me about all the time. And in addition to that, there are definitely episodes I recommend all the time, ones that come up in all sorts of conversations. And the one I think I recommend the most is episode 16 on framing. It's one I really realized through creating all the content for the podcast and all the conversations I've had that I truly believe framing is at the core of all good messaging and branding and everything that we do. So if you don't listen to anything else, or if you haven't listened to this episode on framing, episode 16, I highly recommend it. And it's one I talk to pretty much everybody about. I also really recommend and talk a lot about episode 19 on herding. Also talk about the power of numbers, which is 17. That's building upon framing. That's the one that talks about the ending your pricing in a 5, 7, 9, or a 0, which, like I said, is a question I get all the time. As far as some of my favorites, I already mentioned that I loved time discounting because it's one of my all-time favorite concepts, and that I have a research study coming out on that soon. I also really loved that episode with Texas A&M, which is the only interview that I've ever done. It's a little bit different than the on-air strategy session with Marielle, which was episode 10. That was one of my favorites too, That really came out of we were having a strategy session, and I realized this is going to be a really great call for people to understand what it's like to work with me. So I'm curious if you like those. I have had requests to do more episodes like that where you can hear what it's like to work with me directly. If you would like some of those and maybe have a suggestion of the type of problem you would like to have worked through in one of those episodes, definitely let me know. Reach out via email, where you can find me at melina@thebrainybusiness.com, or on social media. The two other episodes I would say are a couple of my favorites. I really loved the episode on booms, bubbles, and busts, because it's fun to talk about tulips and beanie babies and sort of turn traditional economics and show how it shifts based on understanding these behaviors. And the last one I want to talk about is episode 9, which was the very first Foundations episode. It's the episode on loss aversion. And this is one of my favorites because I was really concerned that people would hate it. A lot like I was talking about the series on the biases and this different setup from anything I had done before. And it has really shaped so much of what the podcast has become that I can't imagine a world without the Foundations episodes. But I was concerned they were going to come across too academic and feel like a lecture. I remember I was on a walk with my husband, which I love to do. And we, especially creative brainstorming and things like that, we go on long walks all the time. So talking through new episodes or concepts I'm thinking about. And this was one where I was explaining what I was thinking I was going to do. And I really didn't know if it was going to work out or not. And I figured I could just do a couple, but I really wanted to test it. And I, even from way back, again, that was episode 9. So really early on, that I knew I wanted to create this foundation where I could set up a calendar that you'd be able to have sort of this bias a day or weekly bias or monthly bias to focus on, and being able to look at these behavioral economics concepts and being able to have multiples of these as a product that would be able to be really valuable for the listeners. And I knew that would be something to sit down and do all together would be really overwhelming. And so I wanted to break it up into episodes, which is why those all have the freebies. And I'm still working on that, hopefully going to have that soon. And I was so overjoyed by the response to those Foundations episodes. I know that they have come to be some of your favorites and ones that have been really helpful, like anchoring and adjustment. And so I'm glad that I took the risk and started those with episode 9, even though I wasn't sure how they were going to turn out. And thankfully it went well. So one of the other things I hear from people all the time has to do with what I guess we've sort of called this where we hang out. And so have a couple of other audio clips to go ahead and share with you from where folks are listening. And here is a funny story again from our friend Debbie.
Usually I'm listening while driving in my car to meetings. And I have to tell you a funny little story. Early on, I was so absorbed in one episode that I missed my exit. I felt so silly. So imagine how I felt a few months later when the same thing happened again. What? That's twice I've missed my exit. Maybe you need to add a disclaimer to the podcast. Anyway, I'm doing better about paying attention to where I'm going, and I'm really looking forward to spending another year learning with you.
I love that story. Thanks, Debbie. And I had heard that. I know you told me that story several months ago. That was really early on that first missing of the exit had happened. And I'm glad that you were so focused and enthralled that that happened, and glad that hopefully you weren't too late for wherever you were going. I have heard from people that listening while on their commute and in the car is really common. That's a place where I often listen to podcasts, and so I can totally relate to that. Another very common response is here from our friend Maureen.
I listen to it many times a week while I walk my dogs.
In addition to listening while walking your dogs, which, like I said, is a very popular place where we hang out. Some others have told me that they listen while at the gym. One client let me know she was excited to catch up on episodes while she was running a marathon that weekend, and that she said she was so excited she had queued up a bunch of episodes back to back, which I can't listen to podcast while I'm working out. I need upbeat music. So I am thankful that someone found me to be interesting enough to help them feel motivated during a marathon. So that is kind of crazy. I also have heard people say things like, we hang out every Friday while I get ready in the morning. And I just love to hear where you're listening and where we're hanging out. So I ask you, where do we hang out? One of these places or somewhere else? Give me a shout out on social media to let me know. Again, you can find me pretty much everywhere as The Brainy Biz. While I have not had a chance to connect with all of you, I have been so overjoyed with those of you who have been able to work together with so far, from all sorts of businesses, from those first getting started, like Maureen, who spoke a little bit earlier, and Kadra, who was just launching Paper, Scissors, Paint, also with established businesses, from financial institutions and solopreneurs up to large global multinational corporations. It's been a really wild ride. And I was just really touched by this message here from Nicole Bandis, someone who I had worked with. And I would love to share that with you. And thank you for this, Nicole.
I love every episode. They're all great. They're full of content, full of great information. And I look forward to every single episode. And I've actually worked directly with Melina, and she's really helped to guide some of the choices that I've made in my own business. In fact, working with her helped me to have my most successful first quarter ever. The tips and suggestions that she gave me were completely invaluable, and I will definitely look forward to working with her again.
Thanks again, Nicole. I love stories like that, as I've said throughout the episode and on other episodes of the podcast. So anyone who wants to reach out with a success that you've had, to let me know, things that you've tried, that you heard on one of the episodes, or different things that you're doing. I love working with clients on all of this, as you all know. If you were interested in working together and you haven't yet reached out for your discovery call, please do go ahead and check that out on the brainybusiness.com. You can just click on work with me, schedule that discovery call. I would love to work with you. As we wrap up the episode, I'm going to give a pretty, rapid fire book recommendations list. There are links in the show notes, but these are the top books that I end up quoting. I use as I have a resource library close by with lots of studies, but also these books are ones that I check all the time. The top book I recommend to almost everybody, my favorite, you've heard me talk about it before on episode 4 and other episodes, is A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger. It's just phenomenal. And like I said, I'm going to try to keep this succinct and not dig into these. I'm just going to list them off as good books that I recommend all the time about behavioral economics and just thinking differently. So next is Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, which I've referenced many times on the podcast, as well as Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Also, you can't do a book list and not include Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Got to get both of our Nobel laureates in there. I also reference a lot The Buying Brain by A.K. Pradeep, which is where some of the studies on the 11 million bits per second come from. So a lot of things that you've heard come from all these books. Next is Simpler by Cass Sunstein. It has some really great political examples. So that is one that I've referenced for actually a friend who's running for office right now. Also, The Choice Factory by Richard Shotton is a really great breakdown of 25 specific biases and how they impact behavior. So that's a really cool one. The Invisible Gorilla by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simmons is a really interesting one of all the things we miss when we have our attention focused. And finally would be Persuasion and Anything Else by Robert Cialdini. He is also a pioneer in the space. And again, there are links to all those books in the show notes, so you don't have to be scribbling frantically to get all those down. So before we wrap this up, I want to do a quick peek behind the scenes. I want to thank the team at Pro Podcast Solutions. My team there is awesome, and they've helped from the beginning to make sure I sound good and that the episodes post properly, and they do the show notes every week. Thank you to Mike, my editor, who hears all my little fumbles along the way and makes sure to get rid of those. Karen, who manages all the tasks and projects and responds lightning quick to any questions I ask along the way. And of course, to Emma for the amazing job she does on the show notes. I know I get compliments on those all the time, and this team works really hard to make sure those episodes and everything gets out there for you every week on time. I refer people over to Daryl and his team all the time, and I would absolutely recommend Pro Podcast Solutions if you are considering getting into podcasting or looking for an editor. They are amazing, and the podcast could not happen without them. So thank you to the team. Another question I get a lot as we are looking behind the scenes is where I record my episodes. I've had people ask if I'm in a studio or anything. I actually use an ATR 2100 USB microphone that I can plug right into my computer, and I can record right here in my home office. If you've ever seen any of my videos on Facebook Live or anything like that, and there are those flower pictures behind me, which can't guarantee will always be the case, but that is where I record everything here in my home office. Another question I get a lot is about someone that we, of course, have to acknowledge. And as I said, I was going to come back to talk about Brain, although I know he looks it. Brain is not squishy. That is a question I get a lot. And people, when they see him in person, are a little bit disappointed that he's not squishy. So he is actually a custom creation made from a model for those studying the brain in school. And when I got him, he was a really gross gray color and in 3 pieces. So a little purple paint and hot glue, and voila, we have Brain. I'm thinking it's time for him to have a friend. I'm leaning toward maybe glitter of some kind, but I would love to know what you think, what color you think Brain's new friend should be. So let me know on social media what you think about that. And I will keep an eye out for a squishy Brain. There are some small stress ball ones, but none the right size like Brain is. So I just want to say thank you again for everything that has made this year truly beyond what I could have imagined when I launched the podcast. So I appreciate all of you for being with me through the trials and tribulations, and for listening and sharing some of the things that you can expect in the coming year, the next year of the podcast, this season 2. Again, you're going to have episodes on mental accounting, color theory, more analyses of your favorite businesses. Like I said, Disney and Starbucks and Harley Davidson are going to be coming. We also have courses coming soon, which I talked about a little bit through this episode. I know I've gotten a lot of requests and questions about this for people both domestically and abroad. So I want you to know they will be here for you very soon. I'm actively working on those with a team to help launch them, which will potentially be turning into then a membership site. I know the biggest question I get and request from people is to have more content coming out. So the ink column is part of that. Also working on a book to be coming out hopefully soon, and some physical products. Like I talked about the calendar of the, bias of the week and things to be working on, as well as some other things I'm really excited about. So stay tuned to hear more about those as they're going to be coming out. And do consider, again, joining the mailing list to make sure that you are first to get details on those. There might be requests for beta testers, and who knows, as these are coming out for, faithful listeners, maybe getting a discount if you're on the list for the first week. Who knows what's going to be coming? So it's always beneficial to be on a list like that. You can, again, when you download any freebie from the website, either at the show notes for this episode at thebrainybusiness.com/55, or when you download the free ebook. Also, if you are in the States, you can text the word Brainy to 345-345, and you'll be added to that list and be in the know every single week. I have just enjoyed every minute of this last year, and I'm so excited for the next year. I look forward to sharing the journey with you. And just like that, episode 55, our anniversary episode, is done. And we've officially kicked off year 2 of the podcast. Next week, we're going to jump right back into our behavioral economics foundations episodes with mental accounting. It's going to be a lot of fun, and you won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me for a whole year. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.